Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast. I'm so happy to have you back, and today I'm talking about chapters 9 through 22 for Oathbound, which is the third book in the Legendborn cycle series. So, my gosh, there's just so much that is happening, but I think where my hesitation comes from for this set of chapters is that while a lot is happening, it kind of feels like not a lot at the same time. So today, what I want to talk a lot about is progression, I guess. So as I think about what I've been thinking and feeling as I've been reading these chapters, I want to go back to how this book started. I think my excitement for this story was because I had paused reading the Legendborn cycle for a minute. And so when I picked it back up, I was just reminded how good it was, and that got me really excited. But the reality is, in addition to that, the beginning chapters, so much happened. You were realizing where Bree was, you were realizing what kind of character Nick has become and the type of ambition that he has, at least now, that I think does vary from where he was before in other books. Not that he wasn't ambitious, but he's ambitious in a different way. And a lot was going on. But I do want to say that as I've been reading, I've almost kind of been waiting with bated breath for something to really pop off. And it's not that important stuff isn't taking place. It's not that this story doesn't matter. But I will say that it feels like for the first time in many chapters, and not even just in this book, but even when I think about the end chapters of book 2, it feels like for the first time in a while, we aren't getting a lot of action. It's a lot of story. And this stands out to me. And so that's what I want to talk about the most today. From chapters 9 through 22, we are getting different perspectives. So if you have been following along, then you will know that the beginning of this book really goes into perspectives from different people, specifically William. And then you have Bree, of course, and you have Mariah, and then you have Sel's mom, who is either Natasha or Natasha, depending on how you pronounce it. Those perspectives continue to come into play. But what is different is that I feel like what we're hearing about as we go through these different perspectives of these characters from chapters 9 through 22 is story, but it's also reinforcing for me as a reader that the characters that we thought that we knew they don't exist anymore. And here's what I mean by that. When you start on this section of the book, you start with Mariah, and you were in this situation of realizing that Alice is still not awake. And when this particular perspective of Mariah's picks up, it had been 2 months since Bree had disappeared. And so that is a significant amount of time. When we start this book, you're talking about seconds, hours, days from when certain things had happened, and so much in that time frame took place. But you are now, by chapter 9, months into all of this having gone down. And so I will say, as I think about this, I don't necessarily think that Mariah's character is evolving as much as the other ones, but I do think that it is shifting. And here's what I mean by that. Because Alice is still in this frozen state and they don't know what to do or how to help her, they are trying everything that they can think of. And what ends up happening is that Mariah essentially goes under, if you will, into this in-between limbo and finds Alice. And she doesn't necessarily talk to her in the traditional sense of a back and forth dialogue, but she sees her and Alice speaks, and she realizes that Alice is stuck in the moment of when she got hurt and when the fighting was going down at Volition, and that she is replaying it over and over because she's trying to figure out if there's a different outcome or if there's something that she could have done differently. And when Mariah comes out of this, they say this is just so dangerous. She could get stuck in that until she dies, and there's no way out of that. So even though you are hopeful that Mariah goes under and can reach Alice and knows how to get to her, you also are realizing that in this moment, that isn't the answer to save Alice, that this is layered. when all of that happens and Mariah comes out and realizes that Valak is talking to Hope and talking to Aunt Lou, he wants to try something that Aunt Lou isn't willing to do. And when Mariah hears about it and presses him, she basically says, like, look, I can use magic or abilities to be able to become Aunt Lou because the people you're trying to go see don't know her. And so I can go in her place. And obviously, Valak is pushing against this because he thinks it's so dangerous, and it is. But what is interesting about that is that this is when that happens, you then go into quite a few chapters where you don't get to see Mariah's perspective again. And what's really powerful about that is that it gives you this sense of time that from her deciding that to when it happens, that there's a lot of preparation and whatever that's going to go into this. And I say that because chapter 23, where I've stopped and I haven't started chapter 23, goes back to being Mariah's perspective. Now, I'll explain the passage of time in a second, but what's powerful about Mariah saying that is this is the first time that I have really felt like Mariah is trying to step up. It's not that she hasn't wanted to help. It's not that she hasn't provided advice or tried to be there or support when all of this is going down. But even in this book, there are comments that she makes when you are listening to her perspective at the beginning where she's like, man, everyone around me is like poised to engage. They're poised to fight. They want to help. And there's not much that I can do. It's like she's realizing her own shortcomings, and she's having this process of like, I know that Bree is this hugely powerful being, more so than just a medium, and that gives her this advantage to feel this willingness to like spring into action, whereas Mariah doesn't have powers or whatever. But it's more than that. I think she recognizes that she won't ever have that, but that she is also questioning like her own bravery in a way, and that lack of willingness to just be fearless and to dive in. And this moment is her doing that. There is something that has happened to her in this short time of a couple of months where she is willing to, more or less, she's willing to sacrifice it all to go and help Valak. And I feel like this is the beginning of us seeing something really powerful shift in Mariah. And so that's kind of the beginning of this kind of like character evolution that I feel like is happening in chapters 9 through 22. The other thing that hit me is in relation to Alice, but it doesn't come until later on. So the other perspective that I want to talk about is Natasha, and Sel's mom is doing audio recordings. So most of the perspectives that you see from her up until this point of reading through chapter 22 are audio recordings. There's only one moment where you kind of are in real time, where she's actually like having a dialogue with Sel. And in all of these things, whether it's her and her audio recording as a part of her research, or in the conversation that she ends up having with Sel, you're going through her realization that this is a very different journey for him than it was for her. And she says, she does acknowledge to him, like, what worked for me may not work for you. And so it doesn't mean that I'm going to give up. We just have to be patient, and you have to trust me. Like, there are other things that we may have to try, or differences in this approach. And he cops an attitude with her and almost questions it in a way. At the same time, she acknowledges in these catalogs that she's making in these research recordings that he's always willing. He's always willing to try. He's always willing to come back with her when he, quote unquote, escapes the house. And this last recording, up until the point that I'm at in the book, she says, like, him escaping is becoming more frequent, and my ability to find him is taking longer, but I still am able to find him. And every time I do, he is willing to come back with me. But the path that leads me to finding him is bloodshed. And sometimes it's black blood, which is demon. Sometimes it's red blood, which is human. She's like, but it's never him doing it. That stood out to me in this kind of latest recording that she made, because it reminds me of the old Sel. And what that tells me is that even though he is in full demon mode, what drives him seems to still be at the core of who he is. And I don't know what that is. For now, we'll call it a sense of duty. But I actually, now that I say that, I think it's more than that. I think it's his sense of honor. He is hunting something that is causing this bloodshed. To me, that is what is implied. We don't know that yet for a fact, especially because this last recording that is from Natasha's point of view is a very short chapter, so it's only a couple of pages. But there was just this moment where, well, let me put it this way. I've realized that the cell that we were going to come into this book was not going to be him. And I haven't been surprised by how he has been shown as a character so far because of the fact that we know he's a demon. So I knew that he was going to be different. But there is part of him in this moment of her finding him and saying that, like, yes, there's bloodshed, but it's not his. Like, it gives me hope that Cell is still in there and that sense of honor is more powerful and drives him more than this demon bit, which gives me hope. But I really don't know what it's going to be like for her to help him. I don't know if he's going to come out of this completely. I don't know if he is going to ever be closer to the Cell that we once knew, or if he's going to stay in this realm but be almost somewhat of like an honorable demon. And I don't know what that looks like. So it's very interesting, the path that he is on. But I say that to say, because of my acceptance of Cell so quickly as a demon, because I just had no choice but to acknowledge it, right? Because that's just the fact of the situation that he's in. I was again surprised when she made this comment about, like, the path is bloodshed, but it's not him. What it made me realize is that even though I've accepted the fact that he's a demon, there is this theme that we are seeing in these chapters of this evolution of character. And that is where Alice comes in. So it was this short-lived moment that, Cell might still be in there, but obviously the reality of the Cell that we end up getting out of this book is going to be vastly different from the Cell that we once knew in one way or the other. Even if he gets close to where he once was, he is going to be forever changed. And so there is a little bit of like antsiness and nervousness that I have to see what that path looks like for him. But it brought me back to Alice because she's in this stasis. And when I take a step back and I think about Cell, I think about Bree, I think about Nick, I think about William. All of them are experiencing things that are forever going to change them. And you could say, well, yeah, that's obvious because with everything that's going on with the demons and the fact that Camlan is like inevitable and all of this stuff, of course, when they go through great trauma is going to come great change. But this feels different and amplified. And I think it's because we're seeing it for each of these characters in such quick succession. So let's backtrack and let me try to connect these dots. Nick's transformation was almost immediate because we hadn't seen Nick for a while. And then the Nick that we knew blew me, like the Nick that we were seeing in these beginning chapters blew me away immediately because I was like, damn, he is coming back as like a man and he has scores to settle and he has a mission. Now we're at the point of Cell where, again, I knew that he was different just because his form was different, but now we're starting to see these remnants of the old Cell and it's starting to lay the groundwork for what he's going to become and where he ends up, which is going to be probably somewhere in between if I had to guess. And then we think about Alice, a character that we've seen in this book, but not alive, for lack of a better term. And so I do think, however they get her out of this limbo, she is going to be inherently and inevitably shifted as a person. I don't know what that will look like. I don't know if she's going to come away having power. But the fact that she's not just in this limbo, but she has like ether coming out of her body as she's in this stasis, this is a very intense type of limbo that she is going through. And there is something big there with Alice that I think she's going to come out with a bang and she's just going to be a badass. So I'm excited to see what comes of that. And I do hope that it's positive because there was a moment there where I thought Alice had died and that would have really sucked. And I think that would have changed Bree without a doubt forever. But I'm glad that she's here. But I think something major is going to come out of that. And then when we think about Bree, in the chapters that we get from Bree and all of this, she again, it's been 2 months, right? So she's been training and we pick up with her where she's out with the twins, training in real world scenarios where they're seeing humans that have demons around them. And if you remember, the humans cannot see these demons, but the demons are feeding on their emotions. And so if somebody is in this chapter where we see Bree, this woman is on her phone, she's walking down the street, she's experiencing intense negative emotions, the demon is feeding on it, and when they feed on it, they end up amplifying those emotions and that like irritation, and ultimately Bree ends up killing the demon. And the reality, though, is that the human could see Bree and can see the twins, but can't see the demon. So she had obviously do all of this in a very stealthy way so as not to draw attention to herself, and she's successful. And the human immediately has this like weird sense of relief and like has this moment of being like, what the heck, because the demon wasn't amplifying whatever she felt, but ultimately she goes on her way, whatever. But the point is that you're already starting to see this relationship between the twins and Bree shift. They obviously are putting up with each other. They have to. But in these chapters that Bree is with them, which is quite a few from 9 to 22, she even says towards one of the later ones that we see, I don't have an affection for them or a love for them, but I feel for them. And I don't like the way that they are treated by Erebus, by the Shadow King. I don't like the situation that they've been put in, essentially, because what you really come to see, it's been talked about before, but it really comes out again, is when Erebus comes back from a while in many of these chapters where Bree was just with the twins. Bree's irritated with him and talks back to him, and Elijah gets pissed because that is his king and he respects him and bows down to him and like gets snappy with Bree, and Erebus is like, it's fine. And he's like, what do you mean it's fine? Elijah can't comprehend that. And Erebus is like, she is not my subject like you are. She is not the same as you. And he is basically acknowledging that she doesn't have to do anything in the way that you do. When they have this conversation and Elijah kind of presses him and whatever, he basically says like, she is superior to you in every single way. And ultimately what the reality of the situation is that when Bree is at her most powerful, which he's trying to train her to do and to be, he will benefit from that the most, because he will then feed on her emotion, which will be filled with power for him to then become powerful. But just now I have this clarity. One of the last chapters that we get of the twins and Bree together up until this point of where I've stopped is the morning where everything went down, where Bree got an attitude, Elijah got mad, whatever. Erebus put him in his place and then left. Essentially, the king keeps like this collection of really rare items, and they need one if they're going to go essentially get time with and an audience with another demon who knows something that Elijah felt like was worthwhile for Erebus to know, and Erebus basically dismissed. So this compound of sorts is guarded, and Bree essentially breaks through it. It's a pretty epic scene, but something very interesting happens. Elijah was like, how did you do that? Because he guarded this basically with really intense spells that will make you feel so much that you can't get through. People can't survive, like they can't take it mentally. So how did you do it? And Bree is like, well, it's hard to have emotion about something that I don't know, because if you remember, Erebus took the faces of the people in her life away. He didn't erase her memories. He didn't erase like who she was as a person. She remembers her life, but she can't remember people's names and faces. So she can't remember Sel or Nick or William, but she knows that stuff happened, and she has the memories, but she doesn't know who fits into which one, and therefore she doesn't know why it's significant. So when these spells and this border was trying to protect this cache of weapons, and she's trying to break through, it's trying to appeal to her emotions, and she doesn't really have any because she can't place faces and names to her memories. And Elijah like calls bullshit and was like, there's no way that you didn't feel anything. And he like sniffs her and he's like, I just smell power, because that's how they sense emotion. They can like smell it. The demons can and the Cambions can. And he's like, I just smell power. And it's a very quick moment. And it's this realization that the training that Bree has been doing and these chapters that speak to it and speak to her evolution is really starting to pay off. But I just have this realization that if Bree hones that even more, that when she becomes the most powerful that she's going to be, if Erebus tries to feed on her emotion, she won't have any because of what he erased. Now, here's the thing. If I know Erebus, I know that he probably already knows that. And he's certainly going to figure it out when he realizes that the wards that he put up and the spell barrier that he put up is broken. So we haven't gotten to all of that yet. We haven't gotten to the fallout of what these actions that Bree is taking are going to do. But Erebus is obviously going to connect those dots and figure it out, which tells me that I think when it matters most, he is going to flood her back with all of these faces and names, and she's going to be assaulted by all of these emotions because she's still human. And so her emotion is still a big driver of her like motivations and ambitions, even if she doesn't have all the dots connected. So as much as it could work to her advantage to be almost adverse or like immune to the power of those memories, I think he's going to flood her back with that. And that is the emotion that he's going to feed on. And either it's going to work, or Bree is going to have it so honed because of what I mentioned prior, that even though she is going to feel something intense from having all of that, having the full memories back, she's going to be able to control it, and he's not going to be able to like feed off of her. I'm literally piecing this together as I'm talking, because obviously this is a real-time recording. So I'm giving you my immediate thoughts and kind of brainstorming as I'm, thinking about all of this. But it's interesting to think about, and it gives me hope that Bree is really going to step into her own. But there's two things I want to mention to this before I move on to William. Bree is so far from the Bree that we knew. And honestly, in this moment, I do not like it. The minute that Erebus took away those faces and names, the way that Bree operated and the way that her dialogue is when you're reading from her perspective shifted. So major freaking shout out to the author, because you can tell that this like barrier of like coldness and absenteeism immediately came into place, and it is slight, but it is there. And so that it's not exactly the Bree that you once knew. And I do worry that isn't going to come back in full. And I hope that isn't the case. So when we talk about this character evolution, the Bree that we see now is completely different in a lot of ways. But I hope that when she gets her full picture back of her life and all of these people, because I do believe it's going to happen, that it just snaps back into place for her, and that it's the Bree that we once knew and love, but with a renewed sense of like perspective and drive and confidence in herself. That's what I hope. Now, the other possibility, and I thought about this when I was reading these chapters, is that she never remembers. And that because a lot of what she talks about and what Erebus holds over her head is if you go back to them, they will think you forgot them. What always has driven me crazy about that dialogue, and what has kind of frankly pissed me off with Bree, is that why doesn't she have the logic enough and like the wherewithal enough to say or to know or to think it doesn't matter? Like, I would be able to go and explain to them what has happened, and they would be willing to get to know me again, and it's fine. And that has always driven me crazy. However, I also, on the other side of that same coin, I realized that she can't actually believe that because she can't pinpoint the people who were once in her life. So she doesn't exactly know how they operate in the current state that she's in, because he has removed certain bits of who they are and that memory. So she can't actually say, I know that I can trust them and I know that they would believe me, because she doesn't actually know that. So what he's doing is a very powerful thing. He's like leaving something there for her to grasp onto, but he's taking away just enough of the important parts for her to have doubt. Because if he didn't, then she would be doing exactly what I said. She would say, fuck you, excuse my French, but she would, and say, I don't care. They're going to believe me and they're going to trust me, and they will understand when I tell them all of this, and it won't matter. We will rebuild whatever we had, or we will make something new, and we will just keep it pushing because it doesn't matter. So, Erebus is obviously doing just enough to make that thought not strike her and not cross her mind. But it does irritate me as a reader, because my first inclination is like, just go, just bolt, and you will be able to figure it out with them and they will believe you. But again, I don't think Bree inherently believes that, because she doesn't actually know it to be true. So it is interesting to watch that all happen. But the last little bit that I'll say is that the main reason why Bree gets irritated with Erebus is because when she's out with the twins, she comes across another root crafter. And this girl recognizes her ability immediately. Doesn't know her to be the Scion of Arthur or any of this, but you can tell she knows that she has the power. And they have this interaction. Bree ultimately can't save this girl, and this girl gets taken by a warlock. But there is this chapter where Bree basically says, and this ties to this whole situation with the twins and, them having this back and forth with Erebus. But Zoe basically says, like, I don't want people to go through this. I don't want these people to be taken. Like, of course, I understand that the king has to feed off of both humans and demons, and he's getting his energy from somewhere. But that could have been you or I in another scenario. So no, I don't want that girl to die. I don't want anyone else to die. Of course I don't. But like, what can we do about it? That is a really pivotal shift because she's seeing Zoe in a different light, but you also start to see a little bit of that old Brie where she's like, I already know myself enough to know that I'm not going to let this go. And in the chapters so far, the Brie that we've seen with having just enough of her memory taken away, like I said, has kind of been cold and just kind of like off. That these chapters with the twins are really starting to bring back out that humanness in her. And that's what I think makes Brie Brie. She cares a lot about people. She feels deeply. She wants justice. And this girl is the first time in a while, in these couple of months that she's been away, that I think that it brings it out in her because she realizes that there's things truly bigger than her that are happening. And I guess it's not that she didn't realize that and she doesn't know it, but I think she forgot. I think she got removed from the real world and went into this situation. And even when she's out in the world with the twins, it's only for training purposes. She's not going to the store. She's not going to the movies. She's not buying clothes. Like, she's not living a normal life. And so in this moment of, even though they were doing quote unquote work, seeing this girl and having this interaction, I think brought her back to reality of like, serious stuff is going down. And I know that inherently this doesn't sit well with me and my morals and the kind of person that I want to be. So if Erebus is going to let me explore and use my powers in my own way, then he has to put up with the outcome of that. And she's going to be relentless. And so again, we're starting to see this shift, even with the twins and how they relate to Brianna and how they interact with her, where I think that those three are going to become a force to be reckoned with. I mean, we know Brie is, but I think they all are. And I think when push comes to shove, they're going to be on her side when it comes to taking down Erebus. I think that in the end, they are not going to be on his side. And I think this is the beginning of that relationship really and deeply and truly being forged. So I'm struggling a little bit with the Brie that we have right now, but it's interactions and moments like this that I am hopeful for what's to come and that she's going to find herself again, but in a new and kind of re-energized way. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is William. So as we're talking about character transformation, right? Everybody is going through it and having all of these experiences. And one of the last chapters up until the point that I'm at is William talking with Lark. Chapter 22 or so is the first time where we get William's perspective from the first set of chapters that I read. So from 9 up until we get into the 20s, it's everybody else. It's Natasha, it's Mariah, it's Brie, but it's, we just finally get back to Will. And you realize that they too, the past couple of months, they've been out on this quest with Nick. It's him, Nick, and Lark. And, they're trying to find the Morganes and do this quest that Nick ultimately got them all into. We don't see Nick in this chapter. It's just William and Lark. But ultimately, William tells Lark this story because Lark's like, why are we here? Nick is not your patient. Lark is giving him this hard time and kind of questioning him of like, I'm here because you're here, but why are you here? And we're seeing this continuation of tension between Lark and William and their relationship evolve. And William does say or press Lark of like, but why are you here? What about me being here? And I think he's pushing him to say what's being unsaid, right? The tension that exists between them is because of just that. There's tension and they have feelings for each other, but they haven't outwardly talked about it. It's just been this game of cat and mouse that they've been playing for whatever reason. And let me tell you, if I know anything about this book, it's not going to get super spicy, but when that time comes for them to just finally let that tension burst and like the walls come down, I'm stoked for what that's going to be. But they put the conversation about them to the side. William tells him the story of the night when they realized that Brianna was the scion of Arthur and what happened after in the room when Nick was there and William and Nick had a dialogue when they were in the room where Brie was recovering. And essentially, William ends up finding out that Nick has had it really, really rough. When he had been brought up as a child, Nick's dad created such this skewed perspective for Sel that he said, you are doing your duty by relentlessly training Nick and relentlessly pushing him to be his best. And what that means is that Sel could hurt Nick. Sel could actually basically attack Nick in training to a degree. Now with the oath, they can't do that, right? The main thing of the oath is that they can't hurt anybody within the order and like at the round table. And if they do, the oath will kill them. That's what happened to somebody in some of the past books who ended up betraying Bree. But Nick tells William in this moment, if Sel truly believes to his core that what he's doing is for the service of the oath and in protection of me, then that is his belief and his understanding of the oath, and therefore he won't be harmed by it when him and I spar and if he hurts me. But still, Sel only took it to a certain extent. So other people would come in and would train with Nick, and he would end up getting hurt, probably because they had the same understanding of, this whole situation. And William was like, that's not true, because I would have noticed, how is that possible? I would have known when I healed you, I would have seen other things. And he's like, no, you wouldn't have, because Reese came in and healed me to such a degree that it's untraceable. And Reese is William's mentor, or was William's mentor, because I don't believe he's with us anymore. And in this story that William is telling Lark of all of this going down, what he's basically saying is like, I should have seen it. I should have known. But Sel and Nick went through such this trauma of training and of duty that even though they now both know how bad it was and they can look back and know that it wasn't great, it still has shaped so much of who they are, and they've internalized so much of that it is very much a part of who they are. But they sense right from wrong, and they understand that it wasn't okay. Nick knows that how messed up that it was, but still William was like, I should have known. And he's basically telling Lark that like, Nick never had anyone there to believe him, and nobody would have anyway, because of how healed he was, that anybody who went to go look at his body wouldn't have seen the injuries, just like me, like I overlooked it. And in that moment, I still questioned him until I could see in his face that he was telling the truth. And I believed him. And I told him that many times that I believed him. And from that point forward, I trust Nick. I believe in him. And so if he wants to come and do this, I don't question any of it. I'm here because I believe him. And what you realize is that William is basically trying to like atone and make amends, even though Nick doesn't need him to. And he is willing to put himself in harm's way and willing to put himself in this quest for the sake of being in Nick's corner in the way that Nick never had. That is the kind of guy that William is. And Lark is basically saying, you don't need to do this and whatever, but he still also very much understands the kind of person that William is, so he gets it. And in the end, what Lark tells him is that you need to have somebody who will have your back. As much as I understand everything you're saying, and I may not agree with all of it, I get it, but somebody still needs to have your back and to be there for you. And that's where I come in, because you're too good of a person not to have that. And so you have this relationship where Nick feels this duty to protect Bree from everything that he endured and how messed up that it can be. William feels this need to be there for Nick because nobody was in his corner in the way that he needed it to be. And Lark has to be there for William because he cares about him so much that he needs him to have somebody that will protect him. And it all creates this group of people that are just undyingly loyal, like ultimately loyal, and there for each other, and more or less have the same motivations and drive and cause. But in this, you realize that William inherently as a character changed the night of all of that happening with Bree and with Nick, which was many, many months ago by the time that we're hearing about this story. But for the reader, you're hearing the story for the first time now. And so even though William had transformed a while ago, I think what you're realizing is that in this moment and on this quest, that he is inevitably a different character than we first started out with. I think that him being captured with Bree by the Order changed him. I think him hearing this, because that actually happened after this story technically took place. But again, we're hearing this story after Bree and William were captured and then ultimately, rescued. But it all brings you to this realization that in present time of you hearing from William's perspective, he is inherently changed. He is not just this gentle soul that is there to heal and support. He is somebody who is, yes, traumatized and yes, scorned by the Order, but he's forever impacted by that because this was an order that he believed in. This is an order that he also had blind fealty to. And now his perspective of all of it continues to shift, and he's realizing in all of these moments with all of these characters how messed up this group is, and that's altering his identity before our eyes. As I take a step back and I realize all these characters that we have in play, again, Nick, William, Bree, Mariah, even Natasha, Sel, everybody is experiencing profound change. And I think it's laying the groundwork for just some of the most badass moments that I think that we're ever going to see. Oh, of course, I forgot to mention Alice's and all of that. But all of these people are going to, I think, evolve and forever be changed by this. But what is great about me saying that is, of course, there may be that realization as you're listening to this of like, of course, they were always going to. But I think that as a reader, when you realize that as you go, when you are really undoubtedly along for the ride and you can see it before your very eyes, there's something really powerful about that. And I appreciate that level of writing and ability to immerse me into a place where I can just see that transformation and really, really understand it. And obviously I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how all of this is going to go and what the outcome for all of them are going to be. And as much as I'm hopeful, I think I have to start to prepare myself for some heartbreak in all of this because I don't think everyone's going to come out, unscathed. As I say that and those words leave my mouth, I think that Natasha is not going to make it out of this for a lot of reasons. She is just now realizing that Nick is not the scion of Arthur. And Sel tells her that somebody else is, but he doesn't say who. I think she is going to be forever altered by all of this too. And she realizes that her dear friend Faye, it's her daughter and that it's Bree. She is going to get in on the action and she's going to go full force at the Order with Sel. And everyone is going to be coming from all over the Earth and the universe to bring everything they have to the Order. And it's going to be an implosion of just the most chaos that we've probably ever seen on top of Camlin that's going to happen because it is inevitable. And I just can't even begin to think about how much these characters are going to change in their perspectives and their relationship with one another. So there's so much that's left to happen. There's so much that we have yet to see. I don't know if Sel is going to get back with Nick first. I don't know if Nick is going to find Bree first. I don't know if Bree and Sel are going to find each other first. I don't know how everyone is going to come back together and what their impressions of each other are going to be. But I'm anxious and antsy at what that's going to look like. And I just hope that it's exactly what I think it's going to be, which I can't really articulate, but it's a feeling. So really excited. I still have plenty of book left to go. Again, I read through chapter 22. So I am very much at the beginning of chapter 23. And just for added context, we are in part 2 now. So part 1 has ended. We are about halfway into part 2, maybe a little bit past it. And there's 4 parts in total. So I think that if I had to make an assumption, we'll probably have 4 recordings for this book, but I'm just really excited to see what happens. And it's been an interesting feeling. Again, I'll wrap up by saying when I started, I was really excited. I was glad to be back in it. It hit the ground running. It really put me in a good place. And then reading these chapters, it does give me a little bit of uncertainty because I really just don't know what's going to happen. I've obviously made a lot of assumptions and I have a hypothesis, but I'm not super, super strong in that because it's hard to know where the author is going to go with these characters. I'm almost going into reading these chapters right now, at least at this part of the book, with a little bit of trepidation, less excited than I was when I started, but still very much interested, if that makes sense. So I want to thank you all for being here and for continuing to follow along. I hope as I'm giving you guys my thoughts that it is resonating with you in ways that it's also making you think about things differently. If you even have a different perspective or something that is the same as mine, I would love to hear about it. So please definitely, if you're listening to this, you're listening to it on YouTube, please share your thoughts. I would love to engage with you there and definitely, connect with us on Instagram to make sure that you stay up to speed and follow along with the journey. But I thank you all so much for being here and for listening. Can't wait to continue with this series and with this book, and we will see you in the next episode. So until next time, friends.